Okay, so welcome to our React Friends solution demo. So in this demo, I'm going to actually walk through React Friends, the little mini project that you did yesterday afternoon, and then kind of show you and use the solution for this to go through learning a couple of other new things that will help you in your React beginnings. Okay, so it's funny. Oh, this is a good place to start off. This was just tweeted about. Oh, that didn't link to the right place. The lifecycle methods. So there's an infamous. I showed you the thing yesterday. So lifecycle methods React. I showed you this little image yesterday, and here it is. Let me just pull my screen over. So I showed you this. Right? Do you guys all remember that? So, and I told you there's like a bunch of stuff that's outdated here, and this was published not too long ago. Okay, so this is funny because after I showed you this, like 2 hours after, I noticed a tweet of like Ryan Florence, who built React Router, which you're going to learn about next week. He and his partner Michael Jackson at the time. Yes, his name is Michael Jackson. And then Dan Abramoff, who built Redux, these guys were all tweeting about this very GIF or this very image. And it was funny because within a couple of hours, Dan had built new React lifecycle methods. Dan Abramoff. Let's see if it's available. It's probably not easy to find here. This is the guy who built Redux. Anyway, he replied with a brand new version of this, and I want to actually find it and show it to you all so that you can kind of see what's actually going on now as opposed to yesterday. But I can do that at a later time. It's not something that needs to get in the way of our learning for the morning, because we got what we needed out of the antiquated React lifecycle methods GIF. So thing. Yeah, I love Michael Jackson. He's and the singer, artist, but the developer Michael is awesome, and yeah, he's a very animated individual. So, okay, let's chat about React Friends. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is use Create React App to build our Friends project. So if you look in the README, the directions showed you, hey, make sure you go and get Create React App if you don't already have it. So that was one thing that you probably struggled with, at least for a little bit, because it's not always intuitive to go and download new software, and not all systems work the same way. So for me, I like to use the command that they suggest. So that way I don't ever have to install it. You can use this npx command, which is just going to go and source it and find it. Kyle, thank you. Kyle demonstrated my lack of ability to Google this morning. So thank you, Kyle, for showing us that's the new and improved component lifecycle image, the de facto, written by the guy at Facebook who is building the new lifecycle methods. All right. Okay, so usually I'll use the npx command, but I also have Create React App installed globally on my machine. So I can simply run, and this is probably what most of y'all did, I can simply run Create React App and call it React Friends at the root of my project, and that's going to go and install everything I would need for a React environment. Okay, so it's really straightforward, and a lot of times, especially when working with like other technologies like React Native and stuff, this will really slow down a machine. There's a lot of processes going on, but they've taken Create React App and they've made it super streamlined, super easy to get up and running. I mentioned earlier in this week that there was initially problems with tool fatigue and things like that. Now that is no longer an issue. So if I cd into React Friends and run a yarn start, I should get my little localhost 3000 server up and running with a boilerplate React project ready to go. Okay, and I'm just going to make this like half screen so I can keep an eye on my server as it is operating. So this is one thing that's really cool about Node. We're using Node to basically host all of our code the same way that you have been doing this week with like Code Sandbox, and then you npm install. It takes Node and it runs a server for you. And then that server watches your files, okay? So anytime I come in and I save and make a change to a file, and this is stuff you already know, but anytime I come in and make a change or an edit to a file and save it, my server goes and recompiles my code and then spits out the changes right away. This is one thing that Dan Abramoff built or helped to build, was the hot module replacement. So that's what it's called, hot module swapping. It's like he saw this and it inspired him to build Redux, is essentially what happened. So I am sorry, Lucas. It's not always as easy on every environment. That happens. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of some of these things here. Don't need that. I'll keep our header, but I'm going to change our header to some classy title, like with apps these good. Who's got time to make friends? And if y'all know where that quote comes from, you get 20 points for your Hogwarts schoolhouse of choice. Okay, and that's it. I'm going to do that, and then we're going to pull in our friends. We're going to turn this into, it already is a class component. So we're going to make sure that we turn this class component into a stateful class component, and we add our people. So one of the other steps was to throw your people into your SRC file. So now that we can just easily pull it in as an object. So we're just exporting the single array. So it's probably going to have to be something like, yeah, we'll just have to see. We'll have to see how it goes. So let's try it right now. Grab our people. And let's just see what it says here. People. Export default imported as people, so I probably have to run it like that. And if I look in my console, we should have an array of 51 records. Cool. So a lot of friends here. We got 51 friends, and they all have their own friends. It's like we're building Facebook. So we could, build our own little Facebook here today. Cool. So the minimum viable product for this little code sample was to set that on state. And I'm going to just take it the same way that I always do. What is it? I don't remember. There's a shortcut that I have, but I don't remember what it is. So initially, people are going to be initialized to an empty array. And then I'm going to use a lifecycle method to sort of fetch these people. Even though we're just pulling them in, we could technically just set people right there. Not a big deal. The question came in of namespacing. Why the curly braces? Notice how I am exporting this array. I'm just defining something in this file. In fact, let's zip everything up and let's export a couple of other things here. So export const friend equals an object, and it's just going to be name Carlos. Cool. Export const my num equals 200. So I can export all of these, right? If I'm not exporting them as the default, I could pull them all in right here. So it knows that friend is there. And if I look at it, it knows that my friend is, if you look right here, it's saying, oh, const friend equals name Carlos. And we're just exporting it right away. Okay, so this is the idea of exporting multiple objects from a single file. People, friend, and then my num is also available to me. Okay, so those all exist as non-defaults. Okay, they're just singular objects. They're not the default. Okay, and when I mean object, I mean just like that's what Node will treat them as. I know this is a type number, this is an object literal, and that this is an array, which is also an object. but Node will export them as objects. So if I were to do this on the default, so if I were to change this and just say export default, and then don't define it, just export default people, it doesn't like that at all. But if I define it first, sorry, I go all the way back to the top. If I define it first as const people, and then export the default, now inside of my app, I can do this, it should be, I can do this as the people object, right? I don't need to wrap them. Yes, you should only export one default per file. Cool. So if that was giving you struggles yesterday, you had a great learning in what we call namespacing. So you notice here that we have defined the thing, and we do this in React all the time. This is the definition. We extend our class. We say class app. So this is like saying var app equals the class that extends component, right? Or the constructor. It's basically a constructor function in the hood, but don't let that bog you down. Class app extends component, and we export the default. And when you get into Redux, you're going to have files that have like 15 items you want exported, and you'll just import them all, or import them one by one. So if I'm looking in this code right here, what is the default object on this line that I'm importing from React? Yeah, it's referencing the object in the file, not the actual file name. We give it a path, right? In this case, the path means I'm going to look in the node modules directory for the default object from React. So capital React is the default, right? Anything else that I pull in from React, I think there's a bunch of other things I can pull in here. I think there's elements, no, let's see. Context might be a thing. I would have to look and see exactly. The only things that I'm used to using are React and component. I know that there are a few other things. And if you don't mind me peeking into some TypeScript land, so look, export as namespace React. There it is. They're exporting React that way. And this is TypeScript, so don't get bogged down on that at all, okay? This is just how they chose to put React together as far as, cross dependencies. It's all written in JavaScript, but there's, when we're pulling things together from the node modules, from the node packages, TypeScript. Fragment a thing, that's right. Yep. Cool. We don't need to get to, I think there's pure component as well or something like that. Anyway, cool. All right. All I've ever used and needed to use are the React package and the component. Component for, why do you even need the component? Just as a review. What on earth would I be using component here for? Why are we extending that base class? State is a good answer. The lifecycle methods, perfect. Okay, speaking of lifecycle methods, let's set our people on state. What is the de facto lifecycle method to use? Component did mount when retrieving data and doing something with it. And I choose component did mount because we've already mounted something, or render has been called and returned some sort of DOM element. Okay? And then I'm going to choose component did mount because 99% of the time, the data I'm going to be retrieving here in component did mount is initializer data, and we're going to trigger a re-render with it. So sometimes in here, you need to select some sort of DOM element. And if you were to do this in a method like component will mount, which is why it's getting deprecated, component will mount would be called before render. Okay, but that's going away. That's going the way of, I don't know, the way of the buffalo, if you will. But the idea here is that component will mount would fire before render. And if there's nothing to interface with the DOM, sometimes you're trying to interact with the DOM by setting some sort of event handler or something. Okay, that's what I've used component will mount for. But then I realized, oh, render, that we need to have something there that's placeholder, and then we need to retrieve some data and set it on state, which is why once we call component did mount, this .set state will be called, which will trigger a re-render with the new data. Cool. So let's watch that work once again in action. I showed this to you a couple times yesterday. Render called, and then we'll say same thing. Whoops. You'd think I'd have a grasp over my keyboard by now, but sometimes when I have to think about it, I don't. And then CDM called as well. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go and set the people on people state. So this .set state, which is all a part of the updating cycle in the lifecycle methods, and we're just gonna say people. I think that will reference the, yep, so that should work. Okay. And if we look at our console, we're going to get our logs. Everyone loves a log. Render was called, CDM was called, render was called again. Render was called a second time, and we get this log here as a result of this set state being called. If I don't call that, we're going to see the life cycle as it stands, render, CDM. Okay, and the reason we see that without another re-render is because set state was not called. Okay, so now that we have set state called, we re-render and we set that data. So to make sure that that data is what I want it to be, I'm going to look at my React Dev Tools, which is what you should all be doing all the time when you're building React projects. And I'm going to look at app and I'm going to check my state and see that people exist the way that I expect them to. Okay, alrighty. We're moving ahead swimmingly. So let's move into, that's app.js, component did mount, set that on state. You could have done it just like this as well. I just chose a shortcut, which is this code right here is that same thing. The equivalent of that is, sorry, I keep doing that, is this. The equivalent of it in a previous life is this. But if you have something defined as people, this only works because I've defined it up here, right? So it's actually, reaching outside the scope for people. In this file, it finds those people and sets it like that. And it targets this property to change the values of this property, which will be an array, okay? Any questions about that? So component will mount is getting deprecated, okay? But let's figure out so the idea of us playing around with this is not, let's see. So component will mount will be called before. It's good that you asked this question, but it's also good to recognize that this is going away. This is not going to be a part of the React ecosystem anymore. And here's why. Component will mount would initially be the first thing that is ever called. Okay, and then render is called, then CDM is called, which calls set state, updates, triggers a render. Okay, component will mount, like I said, is going away. With React 17, it'll be completely gone. And you can still use it right now in what's called unsafe mode. So they've given you an escape hatch. And so there's a heavy debate. You can get on GitHub and go to React's Facebook's React library. You can check out the issues. You can look for the heated debate on component will mount. There are a very, very far and few between use cases where companies are using this effectively. Where I have used it is to actually hack into jQuery and use jQuery to set some sort of listener on the DOM for me. It's a really stupid way to use it. But all of your data fetching from here on out, when you need initial data from an extraneous resource like a file of people, you would call it on component did mount. Cool. Let's see here. Key value are the same. You can do this shortcut. Yep. Imported people, a read only, or can we unfriend? Yeah. So imported people, you could, since it's an array and you now have set it on state, you can manipulate that. You can delete friends from the list as well. It would be just like our to-do list that we stored in local storage. That's a good question. Anything that's on state, you can read, update, delete, destroy, whatever. Create. So you used component will mount yesterday. That's totally fine. It's going away, but it's not gone yet. So I would go and just refactor it to component did mount. That's it. I'll add a commented out note in my file that's going, yep, there you go. And then we can circle back to that, that image, lifecycle image. Okay, we need a place for our people to live. So I'm going to import in people list from something that doesn't exist yet. Okay, I'm just gonna take that so I can get a quick copy and paste. And I'm going to div. Okay, there's a couple things that I'm going to show you here that are going to be a little bit new for you, but they won't get in the way of anything. It's just a kind of, hey, light bulb moment, this is new. I can get to that in a few seconds, Brandon. I'm assuming you're talking about nested data. Nice, Lucas. Okay, yeah, when we get to nested data, it's really just like any other object, and I can show you that in just a second because we're going to get there. We're almost there. Okay, so here's what's cool. I'm going to use this people list as a component, and notice that in my people list file, I actually have, and I'm just going to say, I'm going to pass down all of state. Okay, because the only thing that I have on state is this people, so this is going to pass down all of my state. That's shorthand, a spread syntax for basically extending this object and setting its properties one by one on this object. So anything that gets passed down as props, if I look now at my people list, kazam, they're right there on people as well. Okay? All right, so the reason I'm going to keep this as a stateful class component is because I wanted to show you how you could have a child component pull in some props. So just like before where we have our constructor, okay, so just like before where we had our constructor get set up, okay, this is a little redundant, but just bear with me for a minute. If you ever need a child component to be a class component as well, or for example, if you need a child component to manage its own state, this is how you would do this, okay? This is just like creating a functional component and passing props in as an argument. But in this case, we are extending the props that get passed down, and then we're simply setting those people on state. This is completely redundant and we don't need this, but I'm just giving you this as an example for how you would need to set up, because I was going to bed last night, I'm like, oh crap, they don't know this yet. So if you did this as a class component, you need your props to come in through your constructor and through your super as well. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to access this .props anywhere in this, you know, just like I did. I didn't use this here, but because it's readily available. But within any of my methods, this would not, you know, this would not work. So if you're doing something where you're going to maybe reduce your state into a new data format or something, or reduce the props and then set them on state, you know, you would take your component did mount and you would have access to the props, okay? And the reason that I'm showing you this, oh look, oh wait, yeah, empty array right now. Props, interesting. People list line 11, yeah, that's right there. So we would need to wire it up the right way. Okay, neither here nor there. We can actually delete all this and create a functional component. Okay, and then just like before, we have our people list, but it's in our header and it's really ugly, so I don't like it, so I'm going to change it. This needs to go out of the header. Cool. People list, ready to go. Okay, let's iterate over this because we need to take a break here in a minute, and then I need to show you some important stuff. Cool. Just make sure I was caught up on all the comments. Okay, so for each person, we're going to create a place for each person to live in our code. So each person is going to have an email, first name, last name, occupation. We'll just start with first name and last name for now. Nothing super fancy. So because of that, I need to wrap this up. I need to have this div take my list for me and map over the props for each person. And then we'll do actually there's an ID on each person, right? Yep, so we'll use the ID. For each person, return me a div with person.firstname and the person's last name as well. Key equals person.id. Cool. First name and person. Wonder if it'll just let me do this right here in line. And since I'm going to be adding a space between, I'm going to actually use new ES6 syntax. This is my favorite feature of ES6, by the way. If anyone ever asks what Ryan's favorite feature of ES6 is, you can now tell them. Template strings, I love them. The old concatenate way. Oh, I have a typo here. With apps these good, that's going to be ugly. With apps this good, who's got time to make friends? Okay, so yes, that is really all you would need to do. If you're working on this for a couple of hours, that's all you would need to do to sort of, for each person, render out the first name, last name, and email. So if I did the email now, I could wrap this in its own div or something and say that div gets that, and then for each card, we also get a p tag with the person.email rendered as well. Kind of starting to build out a little bit of a card here. Okay. So yeah, this is the idea here. Grab some data that doesn't, we're going to import it, but pretend like this data came across the World Wide Web. Set it on state, then pass that down to your child component. Consume that state as props. Okay, and that is the entire React pattern. Once you get used to that, you can do anything in React. You can literally build large-scale applications all over the place. You can build components that you use to compose your application. How to access the comments. So each person has a list of comments, right? So I would say that this now needs to have a comment list. Comment list is going to be stateless functional component. Trying to think about that. Give me a second. Const. Okay. This will actually play into our discussion in just a second as well. Oh, why am I saying comments? Oh, because this plays into the same thing. So the data that I'm going to be working with is, instead of an array of comments, it's an array of friends. Okay? So let's do it. So I'm calling this comment list, but it's actually a friends list. Okay? Bear with me, because this will translate into your assignment. Okay. Person.friends. Now look, on my friends list component, if I open up React, people list, every single person has a friend, we call them comments. Dang it, friends. Okay, there we go. Every single person in my list now has a friends list component that we're going to treat just like this. So let's build a table, or really it's just going to be a UL. UL will suffice for now. And we're going to say inside of this UL, props.friends.map for each friend, make a new list element. And this is where we would do some concatenating. So we'll return a div, and it's going to be the same thing that we did earlier with friend.firstname, name plus a friend.lastname. Okay, and then we want to make sure that each key has its own unique value. So assuming we don't have any friends with the same first and last name concatenated together, we should be okay. Maybe that's a dumb assumption to make. So Susie Clayton has these friends. Sharon Elenoff has these friends. So all of their friends are getting mapped over, getting delivered to the DOM as the data gets transferred down. Could have added it to people list. I could have done that same thing in here, because if you think about it, I'm just iterating. But if you think about what I just did here, this added a lot of complexity. So where's that div at? Why is my formatter not being kind to me right now? There we go. So imagine if I had to stick all of this inside of people list, right? That gets a little messy pretty quickly, right, Nelly? I would have a lot of complexity in here that I could, anytime it's going to be complex like this, I'm just going to bust it out into its own component, compartmentalize the data, right? Now, your stretch goal was to make this show and hide, but we're not there yet. You just say, oh, I have like 8 friends, and I click on it and it reveals the friends. We're not there yet. What we are going to do is we're going to take a break, and I will stop this recording, and we will come back and we will dive into a couple of new concepts with learning how to style with a couple of cool technologies, as well as learning how to type check your props. Okay, and then that'll help us out immensely. All right, so go ahead and take a 5-minute break. Come back in 5 minutes, and we'll get started.